He said it with a smirk. She was never really yours. But I didn't flinch. I just smiled and replied, she's all yours now, good luck. What he didn't know, I'd already dismantled her world brick by brick. And he just inherited the wreckage. Every Friday morning, James Walker stopped at the same cafe 2 blocks from his downtown Portland office. A quiet ritual before the weekend, black coffee, no sugar, a moment of peace before heading home. On one of those Fridays, he sat across from the man who had been sleeping with his wife. The man, younger by a few years, wore confidence like a costume, expensive cologne, a too loud shirt, and a practiced smirk that screamed, I win. He leaned in like he was delivering a line he'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. She was never really yours. James didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just nodded as if the man had confirmed something unimportant. She's your problem now, he said, calmly, almost like a gift. That line cracked the man's grin for just a moment. Enough. What the man didn't know, and what Lisa certainly hadn't told him, was that James had known about the affair for 3 months. 90 days. He hadn't raised his voice or thrown accusations. He'd watched, listened, and waited. It began, like most betrayals do, with a detail that didn't fit. One Sunday, Lisa's phone buzzed while she was in the shower. No name. Just a flame emoji in the preview window. James hadn't intended to check her messages. But he did. One tap. That's all it took. The window opened, and what poured out wasn't just infidelity, it was a second life. Entire threads of messages, private jokes, saved photos, alternate plans, all shared with a man James had never met. They weren't having an affair. They were rehearsing a future without him, right under his nose. But James didn't confront her. He didn't even hint. Instead, he took a step back from her, from their routines, from the version of himself who still believed in what they had. He stopped buying flowers on Fridays. She didn't notice. He skipped their usual Saturday brunch. She claimed she was too tired anyway. She began running errands more often, returning home with glowing cheeks and lipstick freshly reapplied. James smiled when appropriate, nodded at her stories, listened carefully not to her words but to her patterns. Every week, he collected data, printouts of bank statements, flagged credit card charges, notes on her locations versus where she claimed to be. She was careless. Overconfident. She assumed he wouldn't look too closely. And for a while, she was right. Then came the evening that shifted everything. They were hosting a casual dinner for friends, mostly hers. James grilled outside while they laughed under string lights and drank cocktails Lisa had curated like an Instagram post. From the kitchen, he heard her voice cut through the hum of conversation he used to be more assertive. Now he's just there. Like furniture that pays the bills. Laughter. From people James had welcomed into his home. He stood frozen at the sliding door, holding a platter of steaks, watching her raise her glass in a mock toast to quiet men and their uses. She saw him through the glass. She didn't blink. Didn't apologize. Just held her gaze. That was the moment James understood he wasn't angry. He was done. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He placed the food on the counter, washed his hands, stepped outside, and stared at the stars like a man who'd just crossed a line in his mind and wasn't turning back. The next morning, he packed a single bag. Not for a trip. For a departure. He left his key on the kitchen counter beside a note that read, "Don't call. There's nothing left to discuss." Then he walked out. But James wasn't running. He was cleaning up. Quietly. Precisely. He moved funds, canceled joint accounts, and redirected auto payments that had been holding up Lisa's lifestyle. The utilities stayed on for now. The house, however, was in his name. He began the process of selling it before she even noticed he was gone. Lisa didn't text him until day 3. Her first message was indignant. "Are you seriously going to ignore me?" By day 4, it softened. "Can we talk? This is childish." By day 5, "I need you to come back. We need to fix this." There was nothing to fix. James wasn't broken. He was done. Lisa had assumed he'd sulk. She thought he'd be dramatic, beg for explanations, argue over who was to blame. She didn't realize the silence was the ending, not the pause before it. And the man she'd left James for, he didn't realize what he had inherited. James did. That's why he invited him to coffee. To hand over the truth like a poison gift. "You think you've won," James had thought, watching the man sip from his cup with smug assurance. "But you haven't met the real her yet." When the man tried to smirk, James smiled first. "She's all yours now," he repeated. "Good luck." Then he left. And the man, still convinced he was the hero of the story, had no idea the second act was already unraveling. After James left, silence became his ally. No long messages, no back and forth. Just absence. A clean break, the kind Lisa never expected because she thought she was the one with the power. What she didn't realize was that James had spent those final weeks preparing for more than just his exit. He had prepared for hers too. Within days of disappearing, James had already rerouted his paycheck, closed every joint financial tie, and ensured Lisa's access to their accounts was permanently cut off. The house? Already under contract with a realtor. She wasn't listed as an owner. She'd assumed but never checked. Assumptions were her downfall. By the time she tried to use their joint credit card, it declined. She messaged him that evening, "We need to talk about bills." James didn't respond. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered clearly, definitively. "You're on your own now." Still, she kept texting. First confusion, then guilt disguised as concern. "You were the only one who ever understood me. Can't we at least talk face to face?" James read every word. He just never replied. Then came the email from her new partner, the man from the cafe. It landed in James's inbox 2 weeks after the meeting. Subject line, "Hey." The message was short, polite, and carefully phrased, too carefully. It was the tone of a man who had once felt superior but was now second-guessing every decision. He asked how James had handled things during the breakup. Said Lisa seemed emotionally inconsistent. He wondered aloud if James had noticed similar behavior. James let the email sit for 2 days. When he replied, it was with one sentence. "You thought I was the fool. I envy that version of me now." The next message from Lisa came late at night. No anger, no blame. Just, "I made a mistake." Then, "Please talk to me." It was the first time she used the word mistake. James smiled, not out of satisfaction, but because it confirmed what he already knew. She wasn't missing him. She was missing the stability he'd provided, the version of herself that thrived in his presence. Her friends didn't contact James. Not one. That told him everything he needed to know. She had spun the narrative. She likely painted herself as abandoned, misunderstood. But narratives fall apart without an audience. Over time, even her friends began to back away. Not with dramatic exits, just silence. People tend to distance themselves from messes they don't want to inherit. Word trickled back to James. Lisa's new life wasn't as shiny as it had seemed. Her lover, now her roommate, was struggling. Not just with her demands, but with the slow realization that she was not the woman he thought he'd stolen. Lisa didn't cook, didn't manage money. She treated affection like a service owed. When expectations weren't met, she withdrew or exploded. She wasn't used to compromise. She was used to control. And now, without James to anchor her life, she was spiraling. James never checked on her directly. He didn't need to. The patterns were obvious. Her messages shifted again. Less urgent, more desperate. "Do you remember the beach trip in 21? I still wear that hoodie you left behind. I was stupid. I thought I was upgrading. But I downgraded everything." He still said nothing. Lisa's lover, it seemed, was reaching his own conclusions. Based on whispers from mutual acquaintances, James learned that the man had stopped posting about her entirely. Her appearances in his life, online and off, faded. Word was, he complained that Lisa was emotionally heavy, always demanding validation, and not the person she pretended to be. Of course she wasn't. She had performed her best roles for James, because James had given her structure. But without the script, her chaos became obvious. And now, she was living with someone who didn't know how to absorb it. James kept moving. He'd already changed jobs, relocated across the city, and begun the slow process of building a new life that didn't orbit her. And still, the messages came. "I'm sorry. I'm scared. Please just talk to me." But there was nothing left to say. She had made her choice, and then tried to keep one foot in the past, as if James would always be there, waiting, willing to rebuild what she had burned. She hadn't realized that he was never going to give her the chance. But James? He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even curious. He was ready. When she asked to meet in person, he agreed. Not to reconcile, not to vent, but because he knew something she didn't. She still thought this was a chess match. She didn't know James had already walked off the board. They met at the same cafe where James had handed her lover that simple truth. She's your problem now. That had been weeks ago. Now Lisa wanted her turn. She didn't say it outright, but James knew she was hoping to undo the damage, to shift the tone, reclaim some sense of control. James arrived 10 minutes early, as he always had when they were still married. She was late, as she had always been when she believed her presence was worth waiting for. When she finally entered, there was a hesitation in her posture. She scanned the room quickly, not for him, but for the feeling she used to bring with her: confidence, attention. It wasn't there. She sat down like she still had some unspoken claim to the seat across from him. James didn't speak first. "Hi," she said, voice soft, forced. "Thanks for meeting me." He gave a nod. Nothing more. She folded her hands, a move she used when she wanted to look composed. "I know you probably hate me." James raised an eyebrow. That was her opener. She launched into a string of lines, each more familiar than the last. She'd had time to reflect. Things weren't what she thought they'd be. She made choices based on emotion. Not once did she say the word affair. He let her talk. He wasn't there to make her uncomfortable. He was there to end the chapter. "I miss what we had," she said eventually. "I miss who I was when I was with you." James leaned back in his chair. "Convenient." She blinked. "Excuse me. I mean," he continued, "when I was a background character, a guy who just paid bills and stayed quiet, I was boring. But now that your fantasy collapsed, suddenly I matter again." She flinched just slightly. "That's not fair." "No," James said. "It's accurate." She shifted in her seat. The room was quiet enough to make every pause louder. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "You didn't," James replied calmly. "You disqualified yourself." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she lowered her eyes and exhaled. "I made a mistake." "No," James said. "You made several. This is just the one that cost you everything." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the table, close enough for her to see but not to touch. She glanced at it. "What's that?" "Documentation," he said. "Legal, financial, personal. Every door closed. Every bridge burned." She stared at it. "You really went through with all of it?" "I started the day you started texting him goodnight instead of me." Lisa looked away. She wanted to say it was more complicated, that there were emotions involved, confusion. But she knew James wouldn't accept it. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. James caught the flicker in her eye. "Is that him?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yes." He nodded. "Tell him I said thanks." She frowned. "For what?" "For taking the grenade you handed him." She didn't laugh. Didn't argue. Her posture collapsed slightly under the weight of what that meant. "I thought I was doing what made me happy," she murmured. "No," James corrected. "You were doing what made you feel powerful. You used happiness as the excuse." Silence stretched again. She didn't handle it well. "I don't know what to do," she finally said. "That's the first honest thing you've said since you walked in." She looked up, eyes brimming, not with manipulation but with something closer to regret. James didn't reach for her. He didn't comfort her. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "Then do it." "I'm sorry. I was selfish, stupid. I destroyed something good." James didn't rush to respond. The words were important to her, but they weren't magic. She reached for the envelope. He slid it closer to himself. "You'll get it when I leave," he said. "Why?" "Because that's when this ends. And you're not ready for that yet." Her hands dropped back to the table. Her voice cracked. "He doesn't want this anymore," she said quietly. James waited. "He said I'm not who he thought I was. He's been distant for weeks. He's pulling away." "Of course he is," James replied. "He got the real you." She tried to hide the pain, but failed. "I don't want to lose everything." "You already have." That hit her harder than anything else had. James didn't deliver it with anger. Just truth. "Please," she whispered. "Isn't there anything left?" "There is," he said. "But not with me." She didn't argue. She knew. James stood, placed the envelope in front of her, and nodded once. "Take care of yourself." She reached for his hand. He stepped back. Then he walked out, no glance over his shoulder, no final words. And that was when she knew it was real. This wasn't a fight. It was a finish. After the cafe meeting, James didn't think about Lisa for weeks. Not out of anger, he simply had no reason to. His life had moved on. Quietly. Cleanly. He'd found a new apartment in a different part of the city, changed jobs, opened new accounts, erased any trace of shared routines. He didn't carry bitterness. He carried absence, and it suited him. Lisa, however, was still living inside the collapse. It started with finances. Her credit card bills piled up quickly now that James was no longer funding her lifestyle. The utilities were in his name but set to expire. He hadn't cut her off immediately, he wasn't cruel, but he gave her just enough runway to land safely. What she did next wasn't his concern. The house had sold. James signed the final papers the day after their meeting. She received notice a week later. Her name had never been on the deed. She protested to the realtor. It didn't matter. She was just a tenant and the lease was over. Her next message to James didn't ask for sympathy. It asked for time. James ignored it. According to mutual acquaintances, ones James hadn't even asked about, Lisa tried moving back in with her lover, the man she had built her second life around. But things there had already begun to unravel. He hadn't signed up for the full weight of her expectations. At first, he'd enjoyed the excitement. But once Lisa started leaning on him emotionally, asking for help with bills, talking about the future, he pulled back. Then came the fighting. The kind of fighting that doesn't have a winner, just exhaustion on both sides. Lisa wasn't good at being vulnerable. She was good at performing control. But that stopped working once the audience disappeared. She began texting James again. This time, the tone had shifted. Less about regret, more about fear. Everything's gone sideways. I don't know where I went wrong. I thought he was different. James read them all. He didn't reply. She sent one more. You're probably happy this happened. That was the only one he answered. I'm not happy. I'm just not surprised. Friends began dropping away. Some slowly, others suddenly. The ones who had once toasted her independence now saw the instability for what it was. The ones who'd believed her version of the story where James had abandoned her emotionally quietly disappeared when they realized the version she told didn't add up. There were no dramatic fallouts. Just silence. It was the kind of social exile that happens when people no longer believe in the story you're selling. James, meanwhile, had rebuilt. He had found a rhythm without her, one defined by routine, clarity, and a freedom he hadn't realized he'd been missing. There was no part of him that longed to revisit the past. If anything, he wondered how he had tolerated it for so long. Then came the final message. Do you ever miss who we were? He stared at the screen for a long time. That question, deliberate, pointed, wasn't about reconciliation. It was about validation. About her needing to know that some part of what they had still mattered. He didn't reply right away. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because he wanted to be sure she knew the silence meant closure, not cruelty. Eventually, he typed, You're not asking if I miss us. You're asking if I miss the version of you I once believed in. I don't. That version never really existed. Then he blocked the number. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even sad. He was clear. And clarity was something Lisa had never handled well. From what James heard, never directly, always indirectly, Lisa moved again. Different apartment. Different crowd. The man she left James for? Gone. No dramatic breakup. Just distance, then silence. He had stopped answering her calls the same way James had. And with that, the last of her fallback plans disappeared. James didn't celebrate any of it. He didn't take joy in her downfall. He simply accepted it as the natural result of decisions she had made. You can't build stability on deception and expect it to hold. By the end of the year, James had erased every trace of their shared life. The only thing left was a file folder, documents, photos, old bank statements. Not out of sentimentality, but as a record. A reminder. Not of pain, but of what happens when trust is treated as disposable. He didn't revisit the past. He didn't need to. Because he was living in the future she never expected him to reach. James never planned to get even. That idea, the dramatic revenge, the viral exposure, the chaos, didn't appeal to him. What he wanted was finality. Not just distance, but detachment. And he'd achieved it. He didn't follow Lisa's new life. He didn't track her social media, didn't ask mutual friends about her. What he knew came by accident, people who brought her up in passing, often with an awkward pause or a lowered voice. He never asked for more. There was nothing left to learn. Lisa's world had shrunk. The friends who had once circled her like planets drifted off. The man she'd left James for had become nothing more than a chapter she couldn't reread. He didn't ghost her with cruelty, he just stopped answering. When the fantasy turned into responsibility, he wasn't interested anymore. The last time James heard her name, it was from a mutual friend at a business event. Not someone close. Just an old acquaintance who mentioned, I think Lisa's working part-time now. Things didn't really go her way, huh? James nodded and changed the subject. He hadn't just moved on, he had rebuilt. A new job with better hours. A smaller apartment that felt more like his. Even the routines had shifted. No more compromise. No more emotional guesswork. Just peace, finally, and room to grow. People often assume recovery happens loudly, that there's a defining moment, a breakthrough, a grand realization. But for James, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, uneventful. The real win wasn't in any confrontation. It was in the mornings he woke up without checking his phone, in the calm of knowing no one expected him to fix something he didn't break. Lisa tried again, once. Months after their last exchange, a message slipped through, probably sent from a different number, one she hoped he hadn't blocked. It read, "I don't know how to be this person without you." James didn't answer. He didn't even consider it. Because by then, the version of him that had once felt responsible for her well-being no longer existed. The truth was simple, she didn't miss him. She missed the mirror he once held up, the one that made her believe she was better than she was acting. Without that reflection, she couldn't recognize herself. But James could. He saw clearly what he had been, a caretaker in a relationship that demanded without giving. A stabilizer for someone who created storms just to feel in control. He'd spent years carrying that weight, thinking it was love. It wasn't. It was dependency dressed up as intimacy. And once he stepped away, everything fell exactly how it was supposed to. When people asked if he would ever consider forgiving her, James didn't say yes or no. He said, "I don't carry it." Because forgiveness for him wasn't about declaring her blameless. It was about reclaiming the space she had taken up in his mind. Lisa's downfall hadn't been loud either. It was gradual, decisions layered on decisions until everything beneath her gave out. She thought she could rewrite the narrative, but stories built on lies have a short shelf life. James didn't ruin her. She did that by herself. What he did was refuse to participate anymore. And that was the real ending. Not the silence. Not the last message. Not the empty seat across from him at the cafe. The real ending was when James chose himself. When he stopped being her fallback plan, her audience, her rescue net. Because some endings don't explode, they just fade out when one person finally stops playing along. By the following year, James had deleted the old photos. Sold the last item they bought together. Not out of spite. Simply because those things no longer represented who he was. He didn't hate Lisa. He didn't wish her harm. But he hoped, quietly, genuinely, that one day she'd figure out how to be someone who didn't need to break others to feel whole. As for him, he didn't need closure. He had peace. And that was enough.